15th of August, 2019. OMU Commissioners Meeting, 15th of August, 2019, Thursday, approximately 11:38.
There you go. Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting. We'll begin our breakfast with the prayer and the pledge. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this community that we live in. We ask that you would bless this community and bless our local, national, and state leaders as they make decisions for our communities. Give them wisdom and guidance and judgment to do the right thing. We ask that you would bless this leadership team and commission of OMU with wisdom and judgment to make good decisions that are in the best interest of our community. And as always, be with our employees that are out there every day working, keeping them safe and bringing them home safely to their families. We ask that you bless this food for the nourishment of our bodies and bless us as we do your work. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So this morning we do have employee recognition. So today we've got Tom Weber. Tom, if you want to come up, Mr. Chairman. Tom is equipment operator at Elmer Smith, and we were just talking a while ago. He is our most senior operator with 20 years of experience. He also had 24 years in the U.S. military as a Vietnam veteran. So Tom was good in the middle here. So Tom, thank you for your service. We appreciate it. Well, thanks for your 20 years of service. We do appreciate it. We hope you get 10 more years. Okay. Any agenda modifications today?
Yes, I'd like to go off item C 2.4 for further discussion.
So you want to move that to the discussion?
Discussion agenda, yes, sir. Just one item on those.
Okay.
Those be okay.
We can do that. Anything else? Chair? Okay, now we'll move on to the discussion agenda. Now this is the month of August when we do our annual city transfer policy schedule and update. And I'm going to let Lynn walk you through, but the bottom line is that we're in compliance with all the requirements for our policy, so no adjustments need to be made to the schedules. And Lynn can give you the overview and happy to answer questions.
Okay, we have an OMU city transfer policy, and then we do a memorandum of agreement with the city. The last one was done July 2015. We meet with the city every 2 years in January on the even year, so we'll be coming up this January 2020. We have 4 appendixes that we calculate out, and we look at the actuals as of May 31st, 2019, and the budget for fiscal year 2020 to see if we're compliant. And the main thing we want to know is there surplus funds in Appendix A to cover 2 months of operating costs and the city dividend. So we're in compliance with that. And Appendix B, we have to have at least 10% of the ownership, whatever that number is, the cash dividend to the city cannot exceed that amount. So we're in compliance there. And then on Appendix C is the free services for the pilot. And there's 2 calculations there where we have either 6% of the cash retail sales collected, or the lesser of that number, or the number established back in 1984, 700,000 rented by 5% each year, which is around $3 million, and that's the lesser number. So our pilot came in lower than that at $2.255 million for fiscal 19, so we're in compliance there. The cash dividend for fiscal 19 was 7.1 million. Again, the pilot was 2.255. That includes the telecom pilot and then the cash payment in the pilot for the school revenue that the city previously received. For the budget 2020, we have the dividend increasing 2.5% as the MOA dictates. It's 7.3 million for this year, and then the pilot is estimated to be around 2.4 million for the budget. Is there any questions?
Just remind me again, when you meet with the city, those increases, is that just a negotiated number, or is it tied to some reference to some like CPI or something?
It's in the MOA. It's just a flat number. The cash dividend used to be 5% increase.
You know, I know it's going down, it's going down.
You say in that MOA.
How do you calculate the total net assets of the electric power and light system? Is
All the
it-
fixed assets.
It's all fixed, and is that just a number that's agreed on by someone every
No,
year
it's
based upon
all our
appreciation
assets and on our balance sheet
and on your balance sheet? Okay.
that we accumulate, that we're.
Does the city ever
they
audit
cash-
that number that you tell them that that's?
Our auditors audit that number. They get a copy of our audit.
Okay. City usually goes
OMU's
along
part
with
of the city's audit. OMU's audit's included in the city's audit.
Okay.
So they get that every year at the time to include in their audit.
We're an enterprise funded by the city, so.
And when you
their
say
auditors look at
the
it.
total net assets of electric and power system, that includes the water,
No,
telecom?
no, this is just electric.
It's
We have
just
MOA
electric.
on electric. The water is just free service. And that's separate in the water financials, but there's no tests or appendixes or anything. It's just whatever the free water is valued at.
Okay. Just want to make that, I'd love that. Thank you.
Is it considered an asset or liability?
Until we sell it, I don't know.
Will that number change, will that impact this whole schedule?
The pension had affected the 10% for the cash dividend, but now that we've got it set up as a regulatory asset, that went away. We didn't have to decrease the equity, the ownership of the city. So, because we've got it set up as a regulatory asset, because we are regulated with our rates of the city. So, at one time it was going to affect, but not now.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Okay, next up, our procurement policy. As a part of our regular audit, internal audit schedule, the procurement or the P-cards were audited by FITOS. And as part of that, we made some changes to the policy. FITOS and Lynn worked on those. So FITOS is going to kind of go through the changes and the results of the audit, and we will be happy to answer the question.
Right, like Kevin said, the purpose of this presentation is just to provide a high-level overview of our updates to our procurement/P-card policy. And prior to highlighting the updates, we wanted to give a brief background. So like Kevin said, beginning of this year, I performed a routine P-card audit which found the P-card program to be properly managed and administered with an effective control environment in place. Also, during the audit, no instances of fraud or card misuse were noted. During the audit, some recommendations for revisions to the program were provided and discussed with Lynn, and those recommendations intended to support the efficient administration of the program. Also, the last time the P-card policy was revised was on January 18, 2018, so we thought it was going to be a good idea to review the policy again and determine if any revisions were needed. Key updates to the P-card policy include updating card spending limits to match cardholder spending patterns and needs. We added a requirement for new cardholder training by P-card administrator prior to issue of card. The training will be provided by our financial specialist, Latina Warren. We also clarified cardholders and approving supervisor responsibilities and card restrictions and prohibited uses within the policy. We removed the appendices from P-card policy, and we introduced new updated forms, including a new procurement card request form and agreement, a new procurement card limit change request form, and an updated missing receipt affidavit. Next steps in the process include the presentation of P-card policy changes and training at the upcoming supervisors meeting on August 28th. An update of the OMU intranet to include the updated pick card policy and forms, communicate any change, all the changes to cardholders, and update spending limits of affected cardholders to align with newly approved spending limits. That's it pretty much. We just wanted to have a very high level overview of the changes, and if you guys have any questions regarding the updates or the pick card policy, more than glad to answer them.
Did you raise or lower the limits?
Sorry?
Did you raise or lower the limits to match up with?
We
spending?
lowered most of them, so we went and evaluated 3 years of spending, and we saw how the spending patterns go, what is their maximum monthly spend and their maximum single transaction spend. And we figure out there is some wiggle room there to lower some of those down, and in order not to have the cardholder have more limits that they need, or give other cardholders the limits that they need. So
Thank you.
in total, those limits came down.
How many P-card holders do we have?
Right now, as of July 26, 131 cardholders.
It might be on simple view. Your word. You have it on Word.
A lot of different formats. There are not a lot of substantive changes, updates and format changes.
It doesn't bring it up to the Word document.
But yes, it's-
No. Mine's different.
So that was by design.
Exactly.
But-
Start doing it very well.
Okay.
It's been
Yeah,
listed
maybe
in the Word.
that's the Apple one.
No, that's what it is. You have to look at it more. It's a PDF. It was a Word.
It was a Word document.
So I'm looking for, since it is it's a policy, looking for you all to approve the change.
Move for approval. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Fidos. Next thing is our water line extension policy. We haven't had a written policy in place, so we have updated or actually added that policy with the wrong way. There's Tim. Tim is going to give you a little overview of that as we go.
KRS 96539 requires OMU to have rules to govern water line extension. This is for any extension that's over 100 feet. The customer has the right to get a prorated return on investment for a 10-year period should another customer attach to the line over that period. So this is just a formalized policy with an agreement, so we have the monetary value set up that we capture it over a 10-year period. After the 10-year period, there's no refund available at that time. And really, the only provisions that we added to the KRS statute is that we did allow our customers to pay it all up front or over a 36-month period. So that's really.
So is this all water users? Or
This
residential?
is just for residential primarily.
It's an actual customer, it's not a developer.
Right.
So it doesn't apply to developers,
No, but I'm
end-use
just-
customers. But yeah, it would be any customer.
Okay.
So it could be a commercial.
So if a commercial customer had plans to do some kind of expansion that was gonna use thousands of gallons of water, they're still gonna pay to get water line in there?
It was evaluated utilizing our revenue test over a 3-year period.
So this agreement still allows you to do that?
Yeah, this
It
doesn't
was
change
an
that.
extension,
This is only for an extension of.
Oh, just,
Yeah.
an extension, simple line.
Yeah, it doesn't change what we're already doing.
And to be real honest with you, this happens very infrequently because most of it's through the development and install the water lines up front.
Motion to approve.
second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the discussion agenda is our annual health care plan recommendation. And so we've got Daniel Wilson, HR manager, to kind of step you through that. Good news is there's not many changes.
Good afternoon. So historically, we've stepped up here to make recommendations to make changes to our benefit package for the upcoming year based on cost trends that we see from our broker that helps us out. Last year, we made some really small changes to HSA contributions, to some premiums, deductibles, max out-of-pockets. But this year, we obviously took a look at, as we do every year. We don't like making changes just to be making changes. And make sure we're making changes for the right reasons. But based on the current cost, the projected costs that we're seeing trends that are either at or below the previous 3 years. So we don't see the necessity to make any recommended changes for 2020. The overall, obviously, is no changes to our material benefit package. The only small change, which is is a change moving our group life and our AD&D from MetLife carrier to Sun Life. And they've given us some rate holds on all of our other voluntary packages because of that. So, in summary, it's just we don't recommend any changes for calendar 20.
Motion approved. Second.
Have any discussion?
It's good news.
Good
All in
numbers.
favor, say aye.
Have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
We
got one item.
Can we do the rest of it? Yep, sure.
What do we do?
Approving everything but the one item.
Right,
but the one item was pulled out.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Now you want to go back to Dr. Webb? Or no?
Yeah, I don't know, see 2.5, there's bids approved the general manager. I just had a question about the one bid, Kentucky Mirror and Plate Glass for the CSC ballistic glass and Kevlar installation. And I was asking Michael more about it before the meeting, and he said he had some comments he could make about that, so I thought the commission might like to hear that discussion. And
all right.
so, before we voted on it.
Basically, he was asking if we thought we needed, and we had been debating this for the past 5 years, put it in the fiscal year 19 budget. Didn't get around to bidding it out and deciding what design we wanted and things of that nature, so it rolled over into the fiscal year 20 budget. But yeah, I still believe that security and safety of our employees and our infrastructure downstairs is very important. So therefore, that's the reason why we've been planning to do this and why we went out and did it.
I have no issue with doing that. I agree with your assessment. I'd be curious why everybody else dropped out that originally did it.
Yeah, we've called, made contact with those. A lot of them partnered up, did some things of that nature. But yeah, we tried to send it out to 8 potential bidders and only got one. Now, we still think that was within the range of what we expected. It was a little on the high side, so we worked with them and took another capital project and said we're going to scale it down so that the cost is somewhat in the same for both capital projects. So we're not going to do as many door openers as we were going to do and put some of that money towards this project.
In addition to the ballistic glass, was ballistic frames included in it?
I have to put that back to Rick Whitmer over here, who knows a little bit more about that than I do.
Ballistic framing and also ballistic panels below the counter and the doors.
We'll show you a picture of what it's going to look like. It's the Henderson Municipal lobby, I do believe.
Not like this, I'm sorry.
That's good.
When that happens and, you solicit bids, you only get one response, do y'all follow up to ask them why they felt bidding?
We did follow up with some of them, correct? Here we go. I have purchasing over here too.
Yes, we did. We followed up. Some of them, the companies that we had contracted didn't even respond, and when we called them and everything, one of those excuse was, I just forgot about it. I just laid it to the side. That was, Lanham, okay. Will Nelson never even responded. We had it advertised on the website. We had people to ask for it, but they would not bid on it. Mostly the reason why is, from what I understand, is the glass. The glass all comes from a certain manufacturer, and that manufacturer is going to provide, to Kentucky Mirror and Plate Glass to all of those anyway. And they pretty much knew that Kentucky Mirror and Plate Glass usually gets these kinds of jobs. So yes, we did.
We did,
Yeah, we followed up and asked questions.
generally that's the first question we ask is, when we only got one bid, why didn't the other folks bid, and try to follow up. Sometimes it's hard to get that information from companies, but in this case, I think the local folks know that Kentucky Mirror Plate Glass is usually gonna be the vendor that's gonna get the work.
And sometimes your biggest concerns when you're looking at safety and security, especially you'll lose customer service because, you have glass and things of that nature in between. But you can see from the design here, and they've tested it when they went down to Henderson Municipal, is that they can still hear, our customer service reps can still interact with them, and we still have a good transaction area. I don't know what you call it, the little window there, the box opening, where you can do your work and things of that nature. So we still think we're going to be able to have that customer touch. It's not going to feel like you're in a real secured type of place where you can't do interactions with your customers.
I'm sure you handle a lot of money down there if it comes in with payments and things, but you go into most banks and they don't have anything like this. But maybe some of them are starting to, I guess, with the world like it is today.
Yeah, and I was just talking to Sarah about that. A lot of times they'll have monitored systems as far as their cameras, they'll have armed guards, they'll have these types of glass. So yeah, I believe a lot of those, in that industry, banking industry is moving towards being more secure in their lobbies too, even locally.
Yeah. Well, thank you for just explaining that a little bit more.
No problem.
I appreciate that.
No problem, sir.
I move for approval of C.25, or 24, we pull off all three items on that.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Our performance reports and presentations, again, August is our annual regulatory update. So we've got representatives from each area that are going to go through the regulatory issues facing our business. And I can't remember who's up first. Oh, Lynn's up.
This will be short and sweet.
That's all.
Oh, why they put the exciting stuff first this year? All right. Let's see. What I do? I went to the laser and there it is. All right. Of course, GASB is the General Accepted Standards Board. They put out all the statements for that tells us what to do and how to handle all the accounting transactions. It's all the theory. Also, we follow FERC accounting for municipalities or utilities. This year, we had two new standards. 90 is majority equity interest. That really doesn't affect OMU. We don't have a majority interest in another business outside of our business. So that one we won't have to do anything with. 91, this one just came out effective June 1 of 21. This is conduit debt obligations, and what that means, the city is the issuer, we're the obligor, we're obligated to pay the payments, but because of our bond covenants, we're obligated to pay it with our revenues. The city's not obligated. So unless the city volunteers to pay our payments, this is not really going to be much of an effect on us. Compliance update, they always put out new guidelines. Once they put out the statement and no one understands what they're talking about, then they come back and say, okay, here's simplified examples of what to do. And so that's just some more documentation for us to look at in between implementations. Upcoming exposure drafts, they're still working on changing the financial model, which is the way the audit financials are going to look. They're saying November 2021 we might have something out on that. The last one was done in 2001 and it was a big overhaul. So I can't imagine them doing a huge brand new overhaul this time, but they're asking for comments and things right now in the last couple of years. So that'll be, and it might get pushed out further than 21, but that's on the agenda. And then I just wanted to mention, normally I don't show this slide, but this is all the GASBs that we are currently working on. The main one is the leases. We're getting a list of all our leases together, and they can no longer be expense, like an expense lease, or you have two types of leases in accounting, operating or capital. So now they're, based on this GASB, everything's going to be capital, because you basically lease a copier for 5 years. That's its whole life. So it's really a fixed asset. It should be a fixed asset, is what this guidance does. So we're getting all that ready to start for next June 1 of 2020. Any kind of agreements or contracts that fall into those kind of categories. Fiduciary activities could affect us only in the fact that we collect cash revenues for the city on sanitation and for RWRA on their collections. We're a fiduciary for their funds for like a month or two. So if it's not
a material like for a whole year, or if we collected funds to maintain a city park and it was ongoing, an asset that belonged to the city, that would be more applicable to us, but I think we're going to be exempted out of that one. Then of course, the 83 certain asset retirement obligations, that's the one we'll be working on the ESS decommissioning, what we need to book for that one for beginning this year for our audit to end in May 31 of 2020. We'll have to have some kind of obligations on the books for the ash ponds, the things that are mandated. We'll be talking about that later this fall. Of course, the federal tax reform, that's where they went back and I just want to remind you back when President Trump pushed through the Tax Jobs Act, it had in there that we can no longer advance refund the bonds. So now if we need to extend terms on bonds or do something different with our bonds as in to refinance our bonds, we can't do it unless we get to the call date. So most call dates are 7 to 10 years out from when you issue the bonds. So if we do it early and we need money or something for some reason and need to refund the bonds, they would become from tax exempt bonds to taxable. That's what the Tax Job Act did, which if they become taxable, the government makes more money. So it's expected to bring in $17 billion more dollars to the government. So fortunately for us, our bonds are about all paid off in 26, so we won't have to worry about this except for the telecom bonds, and cash defeasance is not affected. We can just pay off anytime early. So that was all I have. Any questions? Same old stuff. Or Dana. Somebody.
Okay, so we have a pretty short and sweet as well, but there were some changes to the model procurement code that was announced in March of 19 and went into effect in July of this year. So on the small purchase thresholds, it increased from 20,000 to 30,000. So 30,000 is the max amount of contract to use for the small purchase procedures. On the contract performance and payment bonds, it increased from 25,000 to 100,000, and the bid bonds increased bidder security requirements from 25 to 100,000 as well. So under safety and health compliance, OSHA maintains a regulatory agenda that is easily accessible by their website. They have 9 topics in the pre-rule state of rulemaking, 5 in the proposed, 7 in the final rule, and 4 in the long term. Those 4 in the long term have been there some 5 to 9 years. And sometimes they'll fall back. Some will move forward rather quickly, but then they kind of stay sometimes. But we monitor this on a monthly basis, really, just to kind of see. Sometimes I don't see any movement for 7, 8 months. Sometimes I don't see any movement at all for the entire year. Sometimes they add new topics in the pre-rule set there. But we monitor it. There's nothing right now that is on the horizon that would be affecting OMU. From the HR side of compliance, pension reform, obviously it's a hot topic this past year and a half. In December, the Kentucky Supreme Court struck down the law that made changes to the state pension, including the CERS. And then most recently, there was some movement in July, but that movement did not affect OMU. But we constantly monitor that. It's not just myself that is monitoring that. Obviously, there's lots of employees that have some stake in it, but Sonia is helpful in that. Michael helps in that. So there's lots of folks that are helping us move into that to watch it and see how it applies to OMU. FLSA overtime exemptions. It's always also another hot topic in the last several years. But although it's highly publicized, it's supposed to take effect in January 2020, but none of that applies to the OMU process at this time. We've done a couple of tests in the last couple of years or so, within the last 5 years, and right now OMU has been following what the new regulations will say. So we're within compliance. The Cadillac tax, also another buzzword that many of us have heard of the last several years. Initially, it was the Affordable Care Act was to impose a non-deductible excise tax on those who administer health plans or employer-sponsored plans that have different types of deductibles and limits that are set in their benefit plans. It was supposed to take effect, and it had been pushed out twice now, to January 1 of 2022, and it's supposed to be a 40% tax based on some of those limits that they outlined. It was, back in 18, it was pushed to 2022. And then just recently, they've had a vote to abolish the tax, and it's expected that the House did that, and it's expected the Senate will do the same. So we don't expect to see very much. Many years ago, I think there was a lot of employers scared of this tax, concerned about this tax. It's just, we don't see that it's going to affect anyone at this point. But we still monitor it and watch it. That's all we have.
Good afternoon, guys. The delivery update really focuses on our NERC standards that we're required to comply with. We currently have 75 NERC standards that we have to comply with, which equates to 972 individual requirements. Each one of those requirements can be applicable to OMU for any one of the BES functions we perform. And that's where this table breaks out. We're registered as a distribution provider, generator owner, generator operator, planning coordinator, resource provider, transmission owner, transmission operator, and transmission planner. So that equates to basically 1,108 instances where OMU has to be able to demonstrate compliance with NERC standards. In 2018, we were registered as a planning coordinator, which was a pretty big move for us, added quite a large compliance burden to us. In 2019, we were audited by CERC for critical infrastructure protection and for operations and planning. The SIP audit was completed in early summer, and there were no findings. Final report is still pending for the operations and planning audit. It was just recently completed within the last couple of weeks. In 2020, we've got a couple of new standards coming out. The SIP 3 up here concerns cybersecurity, security management controls. Specifically, it's going to require some additional regulations for transient cyber assets. PRC 27 is coordination of protection systems, basically to ensure that protection systems that are installed isolate specific faults and don't overreach and are coordinated with neighboring protection systems. And then PRC 12 is concerning remedial action schemes, ensuring that they don't introduce anything to the system that's unintentional or unacceptable to the reliability of the bulk electric system. And then beyond that, this is a list of several projects that NERC currently has pending. Industries working to develop the standards that will come out of these projects. You notice that a point of particular emphasis in these projects is cybersecurity. 3 or 4 out of the 6 up there are all cybersecurity related. On the EPA side, delivery had minimal spills to report, had an audit in March of 2019 and was found to be compliant. And then on the delivery water side, currently 100% compliant. Drinking water distribution system operator certification is in place. Consumer confidence report is available, and they have an electronic delivery option for CCR. That's it.
So on the production side,
I don't know, that's Bill Barrett for delivery. If some of you might not have met, I think he's presented before, though.
Yeah, I've been here a few times.
Yeah. I don't know, I think Alex, this is Alex Kahn. He's our environmental engineer in production.
on the environmental side, on the electric side, we can really kind of split it down to air, water, and waste are the 3 main topics of environmental compliance. Air is by far the biggest. On air, you're going to have your acid rain and your NOx and SOx programs that we keep track of and regulate those. We do have emissions inventory survey that we complete every year for our billable emissions, as well as greenhouse gas report, which is generally your non-billable. One of the big things we did this year is risk management plan goes through a recertification process every 5 years. So the one that was updated for electric included our ammonia for SCR, as well as chlorine for cabin plant, since it's on adjacent property. So that was updated and resubmitted June 21st. Our Title V permit is really what covers all of our regulatory requirements on the air side. We did get a new Title V permit as of May, which is now effective. There weren't any major changes to our previous permit that we had. That's on a 5-year schedule as well. And then monitoring and testing. We have 3 different ways that we monitor our system. We have a continuous emission monitoring system. We have a sorbent trap system for our mercury, and then we also have some quarterly testing that rounds out the rest of our compliance testing. In our SIM system and our sorbent trap system, we do have a RADA. Our RADA was completed end of June, early July, a couple delays because of outages, but we're able to get that done, and we are current on our quarterly MATS testing as well with no issues. On water, our permit is the KPDS permit, which covers all of our water discharge into the Ohio River, making sure we're in compliance there. We got a new permit April of last year, which covers a lot of our decommissioning of the plant, adjustments that are made with shutting down of Unit 1, shutting down of Unit 2, different changes that will need to be made there. We're in compliance there, and that does trigger for us to have 2 other plans, a best management practices plan and groundwater protection plan, which when you tie that in with also the spill prevention control and countermeasures plan, those are basically 3 plans that just work to help us prevent spills, and if we do have spills, how to mitigate those. We have not had any major spills. On waste, we got a couple small reports, Tier 2, Tab Q7, those are local emergency planning. One of the big reports is toxic release inventory. Do that on an annual basis, and July 1st is its due date. We did get that finished. That looks at what we put into our plant and estimates what comes out as well, and what waste streams that comes out. Got that complete. And then the big one with waste right now is CCR, which I'm sure as y'all know is a hot topic. So that covers everything with regards to disposal, beneficial reuse, and there's a lot of continuous tracking within that, a lot of reporting, things posted to websites, publicly posted. So all that is up to date. We are current with everything there. Our costs have generally stayed about the same on compliance. The big one that's gone down though is the emission control reagents due to our decreased use of limestone with just 1 unit, as well as not using ammonia since Unit 1 is offline for fiscal year 20. So that cost went down. Generally everything else stayed the same. A lot of our mercury re-emission, or our mercury reagents, our Unit 2 reagents anyways, and so there wasn't a whole lot of changes there. On the water side, water production side, both the primary and secondary water, drinking water regulations are current, up to date. No foreseen issues coming up in this next year. They also went through a risk management plan update, which I assisted with. Another 5-year resubmission, that was at Plan A. That was done a couple months earlier, back in March. And then all our reporting requirements for water production are up to date as well, all current with no issues. Pending regulations on power production side, 3 really, but effluent limitation guidelines, ELGs, that's one that we've known about for a while, one that that's been on the PowerPoint for a few years now. Don't necessarily see that as something that's going to apply to us. Out of the other 2, which are the big ones, ACE rules should not apply to us. Still making sure that we're watching what that does and how the state implements that plan. But based on current discussions, that won't be done until after shutdown. And the ACE rule is all about working with running units. So CCR rule modification was something that was on there last year. They already went through a phase 1. Phase 1 was basically extensions of deadlines. So there were some hard deadlines if you were going to shut down your ponds, stop putting CCR in your ponds. About 2023 was the year. That's been pushed out a few years in phase 1. Phase 2, however, there is the big one that we're paying attention to is the addition of boron to the list of constituents. So we're keeping an eye on that and how that develops. Shouldn't have any problems there. Water production, pending regulations, revised lead and copper rule. This is something that EPA has been discussing for a significant amount of time now, and they came out with a schedule, but those dates have come and gone, so I'm sure they'll come out with another schedule before too long on that. And then the other is PFAS. That's something that's been in the news a lot lately, and you hear it. That's kind of the big hot topic with drinking water these days. So that's still a pending regulation. We're keeping an eye on where that is, and so we can maintain our compliance.
Good job, Alex. We're ready for questions. Okay, the next update will be our fiscal year end capital update. Once again, I'm not sure who's going first.
The departments will actually have a representative here that would actually go through their particular projects. But we do like to start the presentation out kind of giving you some information on our capital fund balances as well as our assumptions for those balances. As far as the electric system, as of May 31, 2019, we had for capital funds, it was a total of about $9.2 million. About 5.5 of that was related to routine, and the remaining 3.7 was in construction funds. That is a little bit higher than what we budgeted, and that's primarily due to, as you will hear, lower funding, lower capital spending in fiscal year 19 than we actually budgeted. As far as the water side, it's about $50.5 million, and most of that is related to construction funds, about $31,000 in our routine funds. That is, again, higher than our budget, and that is due to the delay start in the cabin plant expansion. As far as what we assume on those balances, we assume that the 13 electric bond funds will be adequate to provide funding for both ESS and delivery through 2020. We do not anticipate any future need of bonds, as we anticipate that our rates will be adequate to provide funding for our routine capital projects. As far as the 17 bonds, we anticipate that that would continue to provide funding through some point in 2020 for the fiber to the home project. At that point, we have included in the budget that it would be funded through the use of reserve, but we will at that point seek approval to use reserve funds as the need arise. As far as on the water side, any remaining 2014 and 15 bonds, as well as the 18 bonds, are anticipated to provide funding throughout 2021, and that does include the cabin plant expansion. And of course, it provides that our rates continue to support our routine capital spend. At this point, our departments will go into their detailed capital update. I believe Austin McLemore is here for delivery. Chris Pointer will do telecom. David Borman is here for G&A. And Russ Evans is here for production.
All right, so starting with our capital, we started FY19 with a proposed budget of just under $5.4 million. We rolled over about $550,000 of that to the FY20 budget, giving us a net of just over $4.8 million. The actual charges were just over $5 million. We did receive about $400,000 in reimbursements for various projects. So the variance to the FY19 net budget was $257,101. Most of that has to do with the Kentucky Wire project on when we received full reimbursements versus some of the final invoices from our contractor. When we reported on the FY18 budget this time last year, we were 2.7 under budget. So and that was because we received the reimbursements for Kentucky Wire, but we received the invoices for the contractor in this fiscal year. So when you actually compare those out, we're about 2.5% over the FY19 budget. A couple of notable projects that we did. Bluegrass Commons is building out like crazy over there. We had a budget of excuse me, $254,000. They actually proposed only doing one phase, but they had a good response to that subdivision, so they built a few more. We put about $440,000 worth of infrastructure in over there. Of that, about $55,000 of that will be transferred to the pilot because it equates to the street lighting that was put in as part of that subdivision. So the net actual for the Bluegrass Commons was $385,000. We also had another project out of our substation L that's over here in the air park. We were going to put in an express feed out of one of the breakers over there, excuse me, to feed the Bluegrass Commons because of the expected load in there. We opted to get on the transmission route and install the spacer cable, the bundle cup cable system through here. We were able to do that for about $75,000 as opposed to a $370,000 underground project. So we felt like that was a much better solution to that for that need. 4 kV conversion, we still make good progress in our 4 kV conversion project. We were actually able to retire sub B. This is just the fence that's left. We're currently doing some environmental testing to make sure that there's no environmental concerns with that. That's the substation that was over there in front of Hager Preschool, or in the proximity of Hager Preschool. We have a $450,000 budget for that. Actual spend for FY19 was just over $340,000. We also completed a tie between 2 circuits out of sub O. That kind of ran back there between Bark Cove. We had a budget of $150,000. We had to do a little bit of redesign because of some AT&T work over in that area and a lot of facilities that they have in that. So that project came in, excuse me, a little higher than that, at about $295,000, but we were still able to offset some of those costs. Another notable projects, a distribution pole replacement, a $700,000 budget there. Actual was just over $590,000. The pilot project we had budgeted for $240,000. Actual came in at $306,000. A lot of that variance is due to the fact that we did decorative street lighting between 4th Street to 9th Street there in front of Brusha, and as we were in that planning, we were just going to do a 1-to-1. The state asked us to install additional lighting to meet an average of 1 on the illuminance rating. So we ended up installing about 13 more fixtures than what we had originally budgeted and planned for. The city, we have not received any of the reimbursements to that, so it's not accounted for. The city is responsible for about $20,000 worth of that project because of the MOA. Transmission pole replacement, again, a lot of this has to do with the timing of the contractor invoice versus what we had budgeted. We budgeted $250,000. We received about $400,000 invoice from the contractor that attributes to a good portion of that $1 million spend. But then, as I reported at the mid-year, we also found 17 bad transmission poles that we weren't expecting. Those run between $20,000 to $30,000 each to replace, depending on where they're at and what's attached to them. So that contributed to a large amount of the overrun on that one. The 3rd Street overhead underground conversion, we had a budget of $240,000. That's one of the projects that we did roll over to the FY 2020. Any questions on electric? No.
I'm just curious, I understand when your projects that cross over or get incomplete across his fiscal years, that as well as they get delayed, you roll that over to next year's capital. When a project's complete, it's under budget, do you roll over that excess in this capital, or does it go back to general fund?
Usually it kind of balances out to the projects that came over, like you saw on one of the projects that went over. So yeah, so it helps offset some of the overruns on some of the other projects that we get through the year. And that was one of the reasons that we sought a different path for what we call the 085-211, the feed out of sub L2 Bluegrass Commons. We saw some of the other projects going over, so we went back to the drawing board to reevaluate, what was a different option to be able to save some money on that.
How many new customers are you expecting in the Bluegrass Commons area? Have you estimated that?
I think they had 260 homes or something over there. So when it's all said and built, it's going to be about a 3 megawatt load increase. So that's why we felt like we needed to have a dedicated circuit out of us into that area. Moving to water, we had a $1.9 million budget on our water. We wrote over $286,000 of that.